The United States Department of the Treasury announced on Wednesday that it has targeted 32 individuals and entities across 8 countries with sanctions for their involvement in supporting Iran's ballistic missile and drone production networks. According to a Treasury statement, these networked organizations based in Iran, the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, China, Hong Kong, India, Germany and Ukraine are facilitating procurement of components, funds and supply chains that assist the Islamic Republic's missile and unmanned aerial vehicle UAV programs. The Treasury explained that these networks pose a threat to US and allied personnel in the Middle East and to commercial shipping in the Red Sea, underscoring the department's view that the procurement activity is not simply industrial or benign, but has immediate implications for regional stability and US security interests. According to the statement, and in line with previous sanctions efforts, the targeted networks assist Iran in acquiring dual-use or specialized materials, offer front companies and brokers, and sometimes operate through third-party states, thereby complicating oversight. The move is framed as part of a broader US effort to hold Tehran accountable for its weapons-related supply chains, even as it publicly maintains a peaceful nuclear program. The action comes amid growing Western concern about Iran's military ambitions, particularly the expansion of missile reach and UAV capability in the region. While Tehran insists its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes only, US, European and Israeli governments point to dual-use technologies and blurred lines between civilian and military applications. In remarks accompanying the sanctions announcement, the Treasury emphasized that these designated individuals and entities operate multiple procurement networks that fuel Iran's missile and drone production, thereby endangering US and allied forces in the Middle East and jeopardizing commercial shipping in critical maritime choke points such as the Red Sea. The flow of materials from precursor chemicals to specialized electronics and propulsion ingredients is described by the department as a multi-jurisdictional challenge involving brokers and front companies in multiple countries and regions. This is not just a sanctions update. The action signals a more concerted global effort to choke off Tehran's access to manufacturing feeds for advanced weaponry. Some reports describe this as part of the reinstatement of UN sanctions, triggered earlier this year when France, Germany and the United Kingdom invoked the snapback mechanism in the 2015 nuclear deal framework. The Treasury did not publicly list the names of all 32 designated parties in its initial statement, but it emphasized the scope and transnational nature of the networks. Analysts say that by hitting procurement channels rather than just the end users, the US seeks to impose greater disruption on Iran's ability to produce missiles or UAVs at scale. Regional observers point to the opening months of heightened conflict dynamics in the Middle East, particularly involving Israel and Iran, as one reason the US chose to roll out these sanctions at this juncture. According to one intelligence-informed article, Iran is rebuilding military-industrial capacity damaged during its recent confrontation with Israel, often referred to as the 12-day war. In practical terms, what this means is that US authorities can now freeze or block assets of the designated parties, prohibit US persons from dealing with them, and generally restrict their ability to access the US financial system. Together with export and dual-use controls, such measures seek to raise the cost and difficulty of supplying key inputs into Iran's missile and UAV ecosystem. From a geopolitical standpoint, the sanctions move sends 2 messages. One, that the US is committed to constraining Iran's long-range missile and drone capacities, and 2, that countries and companies across the globe, whether in the UAE, China, Turkey or elsewhere, cannot expect to be mere intermediaries without consequence. By naming multiple states, the Treasury implicitly warns that neutrality in procurement does not guarantee immunity. Some regional shipping interests have welcomed the sanctions, noting that missile and UAV threats to shipping in the Red Sea, Gulf of Oman and the broader Arabian Sea have grown in recent years. Maritime insurers have flagged increased risk. The Treasury's reference to commercial shipping in the Red Sea highlights the economic dimension of what might otherwise be seen purely as a security issue. At the same time, Tehran is likely to respond. Historically, Iran's reaction to US sanctions has included threats of escalation, retaliation in second-tier theaters, or seeking alternative supply chains. Some analysts expect Iran to accelerate efforts in East Asia, Africa, or other jurisdictions less subject to US oversight. thereby raising the possibility of an evolving sanctions cat-and-mouse game. In Washington, sanctions experts emphasize that enforcement and follow-through will matter. Naming the networks is a start. Ensuring they cannot simply shift or rebrand is the harder part. The Treasury's own description of the networks as transnational signals the challenge. They are deliberately designed to evade chunky visibility. The hope, from a US perspective, is that by raising costs and uncertainty for suppliers, Iran's ability to scale up missiles and UAVs will be constrained over time. For the global non-proliferation regime, this is a significant moment. While past sanctions have rested on nuclear-related issues, this framework explicitly ties to missile and drone production capacities, reflecting a broadening of the policy toolkit. The lines between missile proliferation and drone proliferation are increasingly blurred, and this action underscores that shift. It also raises questions for procurement jurisdictions. Companies in places like Hong Kong, Germany, and India that may previously have viewed such supply lines as marginal or inadvertent are now openly flagged. The message is, if you support a network that helps Iran produce missiles or UAVs, you risk US action. From Tehran's vantage point, the sanctions may tighten pressure, but the regime may also exploit them rhetorically, highlighting foreign interference, sanctions unfairness, and rallying domestic support. The Iranian government often frames sanctions as external aggression, which complicates the diplomatic space. On the US government side, the sanctions form part of a broader maximum pressure policy toward Iran, although one that emphasizes weapon system supply rather than solely nuclear issues. And Treasury officials say the goal is to drive Iran toward better behavior, or at least hamper its ability to threaten US forces and regional partners. Still, the effectiveness of such sanctions depends on several variables: the willingness of foreign jurisdictions to cooperate, the ability to detect clandestine supply chains, and the resilience of Iran's procurement networks. Some observers caution that Iran may simply pivot toward more clandestine or rudimentary production methods, making the arms more expensive or less advanced, but still dangerous. Moreover, these sanctions come at a moment of heightened regional unease. The Middle East remains volatile, and missile and drone-capable adversaries are increasingly using long-range standoff weapons. The US decision to name shipping and regional bases as threatened indicates a concern not merely for forward military installations, but for global commerce and maritime routes. In short, this announcement marks a purposeful escalation in how the US confronts Iran's military-industrial base. By going beyond the traditional nuclear sanctions space and into drone and missile procurement networks, Washington is signaling a shift toward addressing broader and more diffuse threats. For firms, brokers, and suppliers globally, the implications are concrete. The risk of being designated by the US Treasury has just increased, particularly if one is involved, even indirectly, in supply chains for Iran's missiles or UAVs. Compliance regimes will likely tighten, and companies may need to conduct deeper due diligence on third-party suppliers. For Iran, the sanctions present another hurdle. While the regime has shown adaptability before, the increased scrutiny and possible reputational damage to intermediaries may raise the cost of procurement over time. This could reduce the pace or sophistication of Iran's missile and drone acquisitions, assuming enforcement is sustained. Still, the broader diplomatic question remains: will these sanctions prompt Tehran to the negotiating table, or will they deepen its sense of isolation and encourage further asymmetric escalation? The answer may hinge on whether other major powers, Europe, China, Russia, align with the US in restricting Iran's networks, or whether Iran finds alternate paths. In the meantime, for US allies in the Middle East and naval and shipping interests in the Red Sea region, the announcement provides a degree of reassurance that the US is actively responding to threats posed by Iran's evolving capabilities. Whether it will translate into real disruption of Iranian missile or drone supply chains will depend on the next phases of enforcement and international cooperation.